So we represent the statutory harbour authorities across the UK, so we have a regulatory responsibility across the water space, and obviously we are key in playing a role of making sure that everybody who uses the water space that we represent and we look after are safe. So ultimately involved in paddle boarders or any other recreational sport, we're looking to integrate that in within the other operations on the river. So we have a keen interest in making sure that the users are safe, and anything we can do to help get the message out is obviously key for us. Then we have the Thames Harbour. One of the Thames Harbour Master is actually here. We represent all of the ports more generally across the UK, so there are specific harbour masters in each location across the UK, but we are going for a kind of wider rather than specific individual ports. So we're here to try and engage, and then we can get the messages that need to be sent out to all the ports and harbours. So if the regulation or the management structure that's in place in the PLA is something that you think would replicate well across all ports, then we would be able to pass that message out, but it might not always be applicable to every individual port. So the PLA have a huge staff. The PLA have more staff than you would have in, say, a county council port or a local authority or municipal port. In the west coast of Scotland, for example, we'll have one harbour master, but we'll look after 14 ports. The PLA have multiple harbour masters who look after the River Thames, although it's a very busy waterway. There are very different dynamics between each port, so we're here to represent that middle ground that would represent all of our members. So yeah, that is one of the worries is that if there are more incidents and there is no regulatory framework behind this at the minute, so ultimately harbours will have statutory powers and responsibility for safety. So if an incident happens in a harbour master's water space, then ultimately that becomes his responsibility for safety, and back to the legislative powers, he has to ensure, or he or she has to ensure that they have sufficient controls in place. It's all based on risk assessment. The ports are governed by something called the Port Marine Safety Code, which...
You're possibly being a little bit technical.
Okay.
You know, I mean, no one's thought about this before, really, have they? No one's really looked at this. It feels like you're sort of waking up to what you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, we are. It's a much bigger sport than it ever has been before. The COVID pandemic has brought people who wouldn't normally be on the water space onto the water space, so it's about educating people in how to use the water space safely, how to interact with other water space users safely, and part of that is getting the message out as wide as possible, and the UK Harbour Master Association can help by getting the message to the people who manage the harbours, and then they can then in turn get that message out to the people who use the harbours. So it's about making sure there is as much coverage, I think, and acknowledgement.
Do you think you could have more kind of like localised signage? So here you're not allowed on that release waste spill. It's different in other places. Would you like to see more of a kind of national policy? Would that be something you would work to?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be willing to work with the organisations, and I think a national policy would be excellent. It would be something that everybody can work to, a national standard. A code of practice always starts. It's a much easier thing to implement. If you start with a code of practice, that can be passed out widely and can be adopted depending on the situation people are in. So if there is a waist belt required or an ankle strap required, then those are separate depending on the areas, and a code of practice could cover all of that. It would be an initial start before any wider governing bodies are in place, but ultimately I think that would probably be the ultimate win, is if there was a national governing body for paddleboarding, the sport, then there's a single point of contact for people to interact with.